There's a lot of confusion on how God has made a commandment that says not to kill, but in the same breath, he turns around and he tells people to kill. I'm going to break this down as best I can, and hopefully you can grasp onto the concept. God made a rule to not unalive. He does not want anybody just randomly going out there taking other people's lives. However, God's purpose is to keep his tribes holy. If you are a child of God, then everybody in that tribe needs to stay holy. So if there is somebody in the bunch doing something that is clearly a sin against what he said to do, then God is granting permission back then, because he don't do that no more. But God has granted permission to take that person out to keep his tribe pure. So if God says, and I'm going to give an example from the Bible, if you work on the Sabbath, or if you're a medium and you're out here talking to the deceased and telling people what the deceased has told you, then you need to be stoned, because that is not operating in the power of God. That is detestable to the Lord, and God wants that out of his camp. Basically, one bad apple can rotten the entire bunch. And if God sees that someone is being a bad apple, he says they need to be out. And that is why God says not to kill, but he's also giving these people permission to kill for other reasons. And the reason why this can't work now, just like it couldn't work back then, is because people were so self-righteous. They were blaming and pinpointing other people for the sins that they were committing, but they weren't calling out their own sins. So if God says don't work on the Sabbath, and I'm not working on the Sabbath, but that's just as bad as somebody out there doing witchcraft, the people were like, oh, this person's doing witchcraft, let's stone them. But they're keeping their own dirt under the rug. And that is why this didn't work out. And this is why the famous verse later down in the Second Testament, when they were getting ready to stone a woman for something that God said you can stone a woman for, but Jesus said, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And he was basically saying, all of y'all right here trying to stone this woman for the one sin that she did, but what about what all of you had done? Because if that's the case, Jesus could be sitting there stoning everybody. And that was the turning point. So this for everybody that's like, oh, well, God said you can't kill, but he's saying you can stone them. That's why he was trying to keep his people holy, because they let the traditions of the Egyptians and all the Canaanites and the Amorites corrupt them. And they truly got corrupted. And we're going to get into some coffee